The small head broke the surface of the mud like a question mark in the foggy dawn. Black, soaked, trembling. One ear folded down, the other caked in sludge like a torn flag after a storm. Wide brown eyes shimmered, half pleading, half surrendered. The tiny body lay buried in the thick mire, only the nose poking through, quivering with each desperate breath. Every time it tried to rise, the mud pulled it lower. This wasn't the kind of sight you expected on a quiet morning. It looked like a nightmare scene abandoned in the middle of real life. I froze, my chest locking into a single heavy knot. At first, my mind refused to accept it as real. The small head could have been a branch, a lump of clay protruding from the muck. But then the eyes blinked once, slow, fragile, and a sound broke free. A clipped whimper, so faint the wind itself could have blown it away. My heart skipped. In that instant, the familiar morning by the Columbia River vanished. In its place stood a race against death. A 3-month-old life was being swallowed alive before my eyes. The mud here was thick as cement, black, frigid. It didn't just hold. It pulled. Air bubbles rose around the narrow neck, popping sharp as a ticking clock. Each burst a warning. Another minute, another chance slipping away. I saw the head jerk, a last surge of wasted strength. The neck strained, eyes flooding, the unseen body trembling beneath the mire. My throat tightened. I had lived through loss, had stared at death in many forms, but never had it come this close, this innocent. A Doberman puppy, born to run, to guard, to live with power, now reduced to a shivering head waiting to be pressed under. I dropped to my knees at the edge, hand reaching out before thought could stop me. My palm, rough from years in classrooms and later in fields, trembled as it drew closer. The tiny nose brushed against my fingertip, cold, wet, smeared with mud. Yet in that moment, life flickered. The eyes locked on mine, binding me in place. No words needed, just a silent plea. Don't leave me. My breath broke into smoke in the chill. My heart hammered, each beat a drum urging me on. Before me, the mud ceased to be earth. It became a trap, an ancient grip tightening slowly but certainly. And this little one, too small, too new, had only one chance. Me. I didn't think about boots sinking, didn't think about the ground caving in. There was only a straight line. Me and her. My voice rasped out, hoarse but firm. It's okay, Shadow. I'm here. I had never called her that before. The name slid out of some hidden place in me, as if we'd known each other all along, as if fate had written it there first. A soft cry rose from her, eyes fluttering, her head pressing harder into my palm. The weight was almost nothing, yet it shook me to the core as though I was holding a fragile world that could break at any second. Around us, the flooded field kept breathing, wind cutting through reeds, the sun still buried behind clouds. The world moved on unchanged. But where I knelt, a fragile line was drawn. Either she went under, or I would lift her out. There was no third choice. I drew in a deep breath, the stench of mud burning my nose. My heartbeat fused with her faint whimper. And I knew this moment would decide everything, not just for the Doberman puppy in the mud, but for me as well. I clenched my jaw, slid both hands into the thick mud packed around Shadow's neck. The water cut straight to the bone. The muck swallowed my arms like some ancient trap. I drew in a breath and pulled with everything I had. Nothing moved, only the sucking groan of mud, and then her sudden cry, a sharp, piercing sound that sliced right through my chest. It didn't last, just a short, cutting note, but it was enough to stop me cold. I yanked my arms free, black sludge clinging from fingertips to elbows, heavy as chains. Chunks slid off, splattering the ground with a hollow thud, each drop echoing like a funeral bell. I looked down. Shadow trembled hard, eyes wide, neck straining as she dragged in a desperate breath. Mud bubbled at the edge of her tiny mouth, and I saw it plain. One wrong pull, and I could kill her. God! The words slipped out, my hands shaking, heart pounding like a drum. In that moment, another fear rose up, the fear of my own hands. Too strong to guide children's pencils years ago, yet too weak now to lift one puppy from the earth. I had once stood before chalkboards correcting spelling mistakes. Now I stood over a fragile life where one mistake meant death. I tried again, but not by pulling. This time I dug. I scooped handfuls of mud, tossing it behind me. But this wasn't dry earth. It was heavy, binding, clinging like it meant to consume me too. Every time I cleared a space, icy water rushed in, filling the gap, as if the ground itself whispered, "You won't take her." Shadow whimpered, softer now. I could hear her lungs hitching, uneven. Each broken breath hit me like a hammer. I stroked the crown of her head with my cleaner hand, whispering, "It's okay, Shadow. Don't leave me. Please don't leave." But in that instant, a terrifying thought cut through me. I might fail. I had arrived at the exact moment, had seen her, had bent down. Yet it could still end here, in this black pit, with my helpless hands. A thin mist lifted from the mud. Morning light spread wider, throwing the scene into brutal clarity. The tiny head, the tear-glazed eyes, the rings of muck clamped around her like shackles. My body shook, not from cold, but from the despair spilling out of her into me. I had to think differently. It couldn't be brute force. But my mind was blank. Sweat soaked the back of my coat, mixing with the chill. Even the earth beneath my knees softened, threatening to drag us both under if I misstepped. I froze, glanced around. Reeds swayed, river wind carried the raw stench of silt. Everything else seemed indifferent. Only Shadow's eyes held me. They refused to let go. They refused to allow me to leave. My breath came in bursts. I scooped again, flung the mud aside, but it poured back thicker. My throat locked. I wanted to shout, to beg for someone to appear. But there was no one. Just me. A retired man, a dying puppy, and a pit tightening with every heartbeat. Then, in the depths of despair, my fingers brushed the coffee thermos I'd left at the edge. It was still hot. Steam curled from its lip. A spark lit in my head. Heat. That was it. Heat could change this suffocating trap. I stared at the thermos as if it were a rope dropped from the sky. I turned back to Shadow, whispering, "Hold on just a little longer. I promise." And right there, my fear hardened into resolve. I knew I was not allowed to fail this lesson. Not before a life this fragile. My hand tightened around the coffee thermos as if it were my last weapon. The warmth of the metal seeped into my skin, small but meaningful. In this suffocating scene, a little heat might be the fragile thread tying Shadow to life. I twisted the cap. Bitter steam rose, mixing with the stench of mud. Slowly, I tilted the flask, letting the thick black coffee spill over the soil clenched tight around her neck and shoulders. Heat shimmered upward, ghostly as fog. The mud softened with a faint squelch. I paused, watching. A single drop slipped from the rim, landing on her black and tan coat. Shadow flinched, her eyes flicking to mine. She didn't understand, but she knew I was doing something different. "Hold on a little longer, Shadow," I whispered. "Don't let go." I plunged my hands in again. This time the mud gave slightly. I scooped, hurled it aside. Each handful weighed like a stone. My back screamed, my shoulders burned. I dug, then poured more coffee. Each time, the mud loosened a fraction, then closed in again. A lopsided war. But I didn't back off. Shadow whimpered, her sound thin as a thread. Her eyes never left me, trembling but fixed. Each time I carved deeper, her body shook harder. I stopped, pressed my filthy palm to her head, stroking lightly. I know. I'm here. Time dissolved. 10 minutes, maybe 40. All I could count by were heartbeats and ragged breaths. The mud pulled down. I pulled up. Each fistful I flung away felt like tearing a shard of darkness off her body. Sometimes my fingers slid over gravel hidden in the muck, ripping my skin raw. Blood mingled with water, but I ignored it. All that mattered was making space, widening the pocket around her shoulders. I slid my hand deeper, fingers brushing soaked fur at her chest. And there it was, a heartbeat, weak, fast, fluttering like a bird trapped in her ribcage. My jaw clenched. This was not the moment to quit. "Come on, Shadow," I urged, voice low but hard. Just one more time. One last push. I hooked both arms under her shoulders, locked tight. My muscles shook, veins burning at my temples. I sucked in air and counted. 1, 2, 3. I pulled. The sound erupted, a guttural roar from the mud, like a beast torn off its prey. A deep pop from the earth itself. Her body shifted upward, an inch, then 2. I hauled harder, spine straining, and then the great slip. Her body broke free, chest to belly, bursting from the sludge with a spray of black water. She screamed, her cry shattered but alive. I stumbled backward, collapsing onto solid ground, clutching her against me. In my arms, Shadow was no longer just a head above the mire. She was a trembling body, small as a leaf, her fur matted and dripping. Black and tan patches clung in clumps, legs curled tight. But she was breathing real. I held her close, my heart thundering like it would split my ribs. I whispered, "You did it. You're here." But when I laid her down to check, I saw it. The right hind leg stretched unnaturally straight. My hand brushed it, and Shadow shrieked, shoving her head into my chest, trembling violently. I knew at once. The bone was broken. The price of this battle was one fragile limb snapped, but it was still better than death. I stripped off my jacket and wrapped her tight. She burrowed deeper, searching for warmth. I breathed in mud, wet fur, and beneath it all, the raw scent of life. I sank, clutching her, gasping. My whole body shook as though I had survived a storm. The empty thermos lay on its side, its metal shell cold. It had done its work, held a life in place. I looked at Shadow. Her eyes sagged half-closed, breath shallow but steadier. Inside her small chest, the heartbeat still ticked. And I knew. The race wasn't finished. I had only won a round. The next was getting her out to a doctor before the cold and fracture took her. I rose, pulling her close. She weighed more than expected, not in body, but in the life she carried. My eyes fixed on the gravel road where my Ford F-150 waited. The distance wasn't long, but right now it felt like a lifetime. I tightened my arms around Shadow and whispered, "Let's go. Don't give up on me now," and I began to walk. I hurried out of the mire with Shadow in my arms, pushing through the reeds, breathing like I had just escaped a flood. The old Ford F-150 sat waiting on the gravel road. I yanked the door open, laid her on the passenger seat, and pulled my coat tighter around her fragile frame. She whimpered, her tear-streaked brown eyes cracked open, then slowly shut again, her head pressing into the fabric as if searching for safety. I blasted the heater. Warm air swept over us, dulling the stench of wet mud in the cab. The truck jolted forward on the rough road. Every pothole sent her twitching, each faint cry cutting into me like a blade. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Through the whole drive toward Gresham, One thought burned steadily. Keep her breathing until we reach Dr. Marissa Hayes. The small clinic appeared at the end of the street, a worn brick building, green sign faded. Hayes Veterinary Clinic. I braked hard, scooped Shadow up and rushed inside. Mud dripped across the polished floor. The receptionist jolted upright, eyes wide. "Oh God, what do you need?" I found her in the mud, buried alive. Her leg's broken. She's freezing. No hesitation. "Dr. Hayes, emergency room now!" A familiar figure emerged. Dr. Marissa Hayes, the woman who had saved every stray cat I'd ever brought in. Her gaze calm, her voice steady, but her movements sharp as wind. She took Shadow from me and laid her on the steel table. "Blanket warmer." 4. "Prep X-ray," she ordered. I backed away, my heart pounding out of rhythm. The room glared white, soaked in antiseptic. I heard the snip of scissors, the beep of monitors, the rasp of fabric. Shadow whimpered once as the needle pierced her skin, then lay still, trembling. Dr. Hayes bent close, whispering something soft in her ear, a ritual of comfort. I stood frozen, realizing I was shaking harder than the patient herself. Half an hour later, she returned with the X-ray. She pointed at the fracture. "Just as you suspected, clean femur break. The good news is we can pin it. She's young, she'll heal fast. But we need to operate now." I nodded, throat thick. "Please, do it." They wheeled Shadow into surgery. I sank into a plastic chair outside. Time stretched like a taut wire, the ticking clock pounding each second like a hammer. The smell of mud still clung to my clothes, reminding me the fight wasn't over yet. Nearly 2 hours later, Dr. Hayes stepped out. She pulled down her mask, her tired smile unmistakable. "The surgery went well. Pins are in place. She'll be sore for a few days, but she'll recover. She's a little fighter." Relief broke me. I sagged, whispering, "Thank God." But then her expression shifted. "Daniel, there's something else." She held up a slip of paper. "While prepping, we scanned for a microchip. Shadow has one." My heart stuttered. I had known it was possible, but some quiet part of me had hoped she was just a stray, with no one waiting, that I could take her home, let her curl by my fireplace, fill the silence with her breathing. Dr. Hayes continued. "She's registered as Shadow. Owner, Margaret Collins, Beaverton. Here's the address and number." I stared at the small print. The name Margaret Collins dragged me back to reality. Shadow wasn't mine. She had a home, an owner who had surely cried herself empty for her. Outside in the lot, I sat against the truck bed, phone in hand. My fingers, crusted with dry mud, trembled as I dialed. The line rang 3 times before a frail woman's voice answered. "Hello? I'm sorry. Is this Margaret Collins?" "Yes, this is she." Her voice quivered, guarded. "My name is Daniel Moore. I believe I've found your dog, a Doberman puppy. Name's Shadow?" Silence. Then a broken gasp cracked through the line. "Oh God, are you sure? She vanished 2 weeks ago, after the burglars broke in. They took things, and they took her. The police said she was probably killed." My grip tightened on the phone, anger flooding. "No, ma'am. She's alive. I found her this morning. They left her in the mud. But she's at the clinic now, fresh out of surgery. She'll be okay." On the other end, sobs spilled over. "God, thank you. Thank you." I stayed quiet, letting her cry. Sometimes tears were the only language that fit. When I hung up, the Portland sky had broken open, sunlight streaming through ragged clouds onto wet earth. I rose, staring back at the small brick building. Inside, a tiny life was breathing, with one leg bound in white and a heart that had beaten back death. And out there, A mother waited to hold the piece of family that had been stolen from her. I knew I was only the ferryman, but in that moment, even that was enough to make my heart tremble with gratitude. The waiting room door swung open and the receptionist's voice carried across the floor. "Mr. Moore, Mrs. Margaret Collins is here." I rose, my chest tightening as though someone had gripped it. Before me stood a woman in her 60s, graceful in bearing, yet marked by loss. Her eyes were red, her hand clenched white around the strap of her purse. She didn't glance around the room, her gaze locked only on me, her voice trembling. "Shadow, where is she?" I nodded, my own voice rough. "She's in recovery. Please, come with me." She walked at my side, each step urgent, as if the earth itself might swallow the moment away. The door opened, and then everything stopped. Shadow lay in a large steel kennel, her tiny body curled beneath a soft blanket, one hind leg wrapped in a white bandage. Her face had been cleaned, and her black and tan coat glimmered under the light. Her ears drooped in exhaustion, eyes half-lidded. But when the footsteps echoed closer, when Margaret's broken voice whispered out, "Shadow, my love," her whole body jolted, the ears sprang upright, her eyes flew open, and then a cry burst forth, long and trembling, but full of recognition. Her little tail slammed wildly against the kennel wall. She lurched forward, forgetting her broken leg, stumbling, collapsing. Margaret dropped to her knees before the kennel. Don't push, baby. Mama's here now." Her voice shattered into sobs. Her trembling hands pressed against the bars, and Shadow shoved her muzzle against them, wriggling as if to force herself through steel. I stepped back, flattening against the wall. The sight felt sacred, a kind of liturgy. A love so primal it needed no words. Shadow whimpered, licking Margaret's hands through the gaps in a frenzy. Margaret whispered, crying and laughing all at once, "Oh God, you're alive. They told me you'd never come home, but God brought you back." Dr. Hayes entered softly, her voice gentle. "Please, keep calm for a bit. She just came out of surgery. She needs quiet, but you may sit with her." The door opened, and Margaret stepped inside without hesitation. She sank beside Shadow, gathering her into her arms, burying her face in her neck. Shadow let out one trembling sound, then exhaled, resting her head on Margaret's shoulder. Her eyes drifted shut, as though at last she had found her harbor. I stood frozen, my throat locked. In that moment, the quiet ache in me, the thought that maybe Shadow could have been mine, melted away. Because watching this, I knew she had belonged somewhere all along. I was only the ferryman, the one who had pulled her from death to return her to her rightful place. Margaret lifted her head, tears still clinging to her lashes. "Mr. Moore, I don't know how to thank you. They took everything from my house, jewelry, money, but the only thing I wept for was her. Every night, I prayed, and today, you brought her back." I shook my head, my voice hoarse. No thanks needed. I just happened to be there. Shadow is the true fighter. We sat in silence, broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft rhythm of her breathing. In that white room, I could feel a fragile thread of life knitting itself whole again. When Dr. Hayes returned to check on her, Margaret was still there, holding Shadow's bandaged paw tight. I rose, stepped into the hallway, and drew a long breath. Outside, Portland's late light spilled gold across the damp ground. I knew this moment would stay carved forever. A small dog, pulled from black mud, now resting in the arms of the mother she had thought lost. The next morning, I woke in my small house on the edge of Portland, the air quieter than ever. But this quiet wasn't the same as before. Once, it had been emptiness. Now it carried the echo of a breath, the memory of a tiny heartbeat I had once held against my chest. I sat by the window, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. But the bitterness tasted different today. It carried me back to that empty thermos in the mud, the thing that had become a lifeline. I closed my eyes and heard again the rasping whimper of Shadow, the furious thump of her tail when she saw Margaret. Those sounds clung to me, haunting yet healing. All morning I couldn't focus on anything. Shadow's image threaded itself into every corner of the room, as though she had stepped into my life only to leave behind a bigger emptiness. I wondered if this was what a father felt, sending a child back where they belonged. By afternoon, the phone rang. A strange number from Beaverton lit the screen. I answered. "Mr. Moore?" A woman's voice, low, trembling but familiar. "Margaret." "Yes, this is he. I just wanted to tell you, Shadow's doing well. She ate a little this morning. Dr. Hayes said she's been sleeping a lot, but her heartbeat is steady. I owe you the world." I swallowed hard, staring at the small garden outside. "No, ma'am. I only happened to be there. If anyone owes, it's me." Shadow reminded me how fragile life is, that sometimes we have to do more than just stand by and watch. On the other end, silence. Then her voice broke, soft. "You know, when she was gone, I thought I'd lost the reason to come home each day. The house was too quiet. But now, her breathing fills that emptiness again. It's as if she never left." We sat in silence, only the faint sound of breathing across the line. I realized we both carried invisible voids, mine carved by the laughter of students gone, by the early loss of a wife, hers by the theft of a four-legged child, and Shadow somehow had bridged those empty spaces. 2 days later, a small package arrived. Sender, Margaret Collins. Inside was a printed photo. Shadow, her legs still wrapped in bandages, lay on a soft bed in Margaret's living room, her eyes half closed, her mouth curved into a weary smile. On the back, Margaret had written, "You brought light back to my home." I set the photo on the table beside my bookshelf. Each time I passed, I stopped for a moment. And for the first time in years, my own house felt less hollow. That evening, I walked down to the Columbia River. The water moved quietly. The wind carried the raw scent of mud. I stared at the current, recalling the moment my hand touched that small, mud-caked head. That feeling had become a marker. I knew I would go on living quietly, tutoring a few students, reading, tending the garden. But deep inside, something had shifted. Because life wasn't only in the books I once taught. It had trembled in my arms, fragile, yet unyielding. And that life had returned to me something I thought I had lost long ago. The belief that even in the darkest mire there is still reason to save, to love, to not turn away. As the sun dipped, gold spilling across the river's surface, I whispered, as though speaking to my reflection in the flow, "Thank you, Shadow. You didn't just survive. You saved me, too." A week later, I returned to Dr. Hayes's clinic. Not because Shadow needed me. She was safe now in Margaret's arms. But I needed to see with my own eyes that the story had truly come full circle. The scent of antiseptic and the familiar jingle of the doorbell pulled it all back as I stepped inside. Dr. Hayes spotted me, her smile warm. "Daniel, you came at the right time. Margaret just brought Shadow in for her checkup this morning. Would you like to see her? My chest tightened, but my feet moved on their own. The door opened, and there she was, no longer the trembling creature in the mud. Shadow sat in Margaret's lap, her bandaged legs still wrapped, but her eyes shone bright, ears pricked, tail thrashing with joy. She looked up, caught sight of me, and in that instant, recognition flared. She strained against Margaret's arms, panting, a whimper of delight spilling out. I dropped to my knees, hand reaching forward. Shadow licked frantically, her whole body wriggling as if she would leap into me. Margaret smiled through her tears. "She's never forgotten you." "And she never will." I stroked her head, feeling the strength in her breath, so much steadier than that first day. Inside me, something closed, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. I hadn't lost her. I had simply carried her back to where she belonged, and in doing so, I had found myself again. Margaret clasped my hand, her voice breaking. "Mr. Moore, if you ever feel lonely, know that my home will always have a place for you. To me, your family. Because of you, I have my heart back." I could only nod. Her words carved themselves into me like an invisible gift. That day, as I left the clinic, I pulled over by the Columbia River. The water drifted slowly, catching the fire of sunset. I sat still, hearing again the faint whimper of Shadow, the frantic pounding of her heart against my chest, the eruption of joy when she saw Margaret. Each sound had become a new heartbeat inside me. I realized then, life isn't measured only by years spent teaching or days endured in a quiet house. It's also measured by the moments we choose to act instead of turning away. A puppy, buried alive in mud, had taught me that lesson, with a trembling gaze, with breaths so fragile yet unbroken. As I write these words, I no longer feel the emptiness I carried for so many years. I feel an invisible thread binding me, Shadow, and Margaret. 3 lives that should never have crossed, yet through one morning in the mud became bound forever. And I share this with you, those listening to this story, with one hope, that the next time you see a small life in need, you will not turn away. Maybe it's a stray dog. Maybe a hungry cat is at your door. Maybe an elderly neighbor needs help with groceries. But remember this: compassion, even in the smallest form, can change a fate. Shadow lived because someone chose to stop, chose to put their hands into the mud instead of walking past, and I was saved by that choice too. My friends, if I hadn't stopped that day, Shadow would have been lost. A 3-month-old Doberman puppy buried alive in mud taught me the greatest lesson. Sometimes a single small act can save a life, and save us as well. If this story has touched your heart, please share it. Let others know that love needs no language. Let no more shadows be left in darkness. Subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Who knows, your compassion may be the light a waiting soul needs. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, compassion can change the world